Some people believe that the very land is cursed, a place that evil took root and never let go.
Evidence of the Boogeyman is a found footage movie directed and starring Calvin Morie McCarthy. Now, this is actually the third in the series of Boogeyman movies, and this one claims to be the most scary. We'll come back to that. But interestingly, this series actually does have a little bit of a unique selling point in a way. So each of the three films is a slightly different format. So the original, I think, was an anthology movie, so a series of short films all about the Boogeyman, but each one with different kind of people and setup and things like this. The second movie was just a standard sort of feature-length, kind of typically filmed movie. And then this one, as I say, is a found footage. So each one of them has a kind of different format, which does, you know, admittedly give it some sort of unique kind of credence for a kind of series of movies. So in this one, we follow a group of filmmakers, paranormal investigator types, and they are trying to capture evidence of the paranormal. And it leads them to this sort of area with this kind of in the woodland area with a house, kind of a remote house, and that's meant to be haunted, etc. And there is rumours of the Boogeyman. And so these guys go out there and, of course, wanting to document everything. And lo and behold, the stories might well be true. Another interesting thing here is we have a lot of the cast are all, they have been in acting jobs before, but they also do a lot of behind the scenes things. Like, you know, we have, you know, a guy who, if you look at the credits, for example, one of the guys is more often than not a cinematographer. The female character is a makeup artist for the most part, but they all have a little bit of acting creds as well. And obviously Calvin Morie McCarthy is typically a director, but here they are all playing filmmakers in a way. So it's interesting in some aspects for those sort of two elements, the different formats, and obviously the fact that here we have filmmakers actually playing filmmakers, but not all kind of them come from an acting background, which I kind of found interesting, I have to say, at the very least. So outside of that though, what can we say that works in this movie's favour? Now, like all of these films, they are kind of low budget. Now, to the claim that it's the most scary out of the three, I would say I agree. It probably is the most scary out of the three of them. But I think partially it's down to the fact that this movie hides the Boogeyman a lot of the time. So we see very little of the Boogeyman. So it does have a little bit more of an element of kind of foreboding in a way, because it doesn't kind of show its hands. Now, I would have said for the third movie in a series, it's a little bit weird to kind of hide away your creature. I mean, this really should have been the first movie, because at this point, if you watch the series up until this point, you've seen the Boogeyman quite often up until now. So in a way, I think this one should have been the first movie in a way. And if you haven't seen the originals, there's no connectivity. But I would actually say watch this one first, because, like I said, the fact that you really don't see the Boogeyman a lot at all in this movie, to be honest, does give it a little bit more of a creep factor, because you don't quite know, you know, if and when it's going to pop up, and when it is, it's only kind of fleeting, and you kind of like, what was that sort of thing. But obviously in the original two movies, you know, it's just there, loud and proud, basically, like this shirt. Anyway, but yeah, I would say it does give it a couple of notches up in the creep factor. I think there's also some reasonable kind of like jump scares and things like that. It's a couple of like a bit of spooky imagery, like there's this crucified corpse that we kind of see kind of pop up here and there. And again, I think it looks relatively effective, I have to be honest with you, when we kind of do see these little elements that kind of pop up here and there. It has a sort of a small cast, really only, well, there's 5 characters in total, I would say. So you feel like you kind of get to know the characters quite well. There's kind of a subplot where, you know, there's three out these filmmakers are all trying to kind of, you know, get it in with this one female of the crew and stuff. So they're all trying to sort of try their luck, and so that's kind of a little subplot. And you know, there's an excuse for this female character to get naked a couple of times. So you know, there is that. But there's, you know, it tries to have a little bit of fleshing out the, sort of the characters here and there. And I gotta say, because we see the boogeyman creature more obscured in this one, and you know, shot very quickly, I actually think the makeup looks quite effective. I will say here, I think the original movie, or the original two films, I maybe you can say it looks a little rubbery, but here I think it actually kind of works pretty well, if I'm honest. So you know, it's got that kind of going for it. And I think the only other thing I would say, the positives here, you know, with found footage, you have to have that believability that why are people filming? What would be the circumstances? Well, they would be doing this, but here they are. They're all filmmakers. There's lots of cameras, so you have that, and they're wanting to try and capture something on tape. So you know, there's a good reason for that, and they've got reasonable quality cameras and stuff because they are filmmakers. So again, you have a little bit more in regards to not too sort of grainy and everything like that. All right, so let's talk about what does not work. One of the critics I had with the second film, which is the feature-length film, is that it didn't really have a huge amount of story to fill out a runtime. And I've got to be honest with you, I think this is true of this one. It really is just four people in the woods looking around and then ultimately finding some type of supernatural presence. And there's not much else to it, I've got to say. So it's not the most exciting of plots, if we're being fair. You know, what do you expect from a found footage, I suppose, like this, a Monster in the Woods found footage movie? But it really isn't a lot of actual development in regards to story here. It is quite bare bones. There's that. But what we do get, how is that? It's a lot of people walking around the woods shouting and screaming. I have to say that's kind of tends to be the bulk of the runtime here. Again, not exactly thrilling. I have to say as well, the movie takes some odd decisions. I'll give you two examples. I think the characters overreact a bit much here. Now, there is definitely a creature, right? But they don't know this until quite late. But they're kind of massively freaking out. For example, they've interviewed this guy earlier on in the movie. And then at night, they just kind of see him in the woods. And they're like, oh, freaking out about it. And he just sat there in the woods on a chair, like talking to himself. And now they're proper running away from him. And he gets up and starts walking. And they think, why? This is like some old guy that you have interviewed earlier on. Why would you be freaking out? It just seems it's a massively like overreacting to things. And at one point they hear coyotes, and they go, you know, it could be a Wendigo. It's like, oh, come on, you know. It's so, you know, it's overreacting to things. Which leads me to the second thing, is that it has this weird sort of goofy element to it, where the characters act really goofy. And, like, let me give you an example. So our female character, Naomi, she's kind of the host of this kind of, you know, supernatural show, whatever it is they're doing. But she is constantly being hit on by the guys. And there's a couple of sequences where they're trying to get her to get naked. And this one guy says, oh yeah, if you... this camera's got like heat vision. If it sees skin, you become invisible. And she's like, so why don't you get naked and try out? She's like, all right then. I'm thinking, man, come on. I mean, it's just silly. I mean, it's an excuse to have some boobs in your movie. I get it, but like, it makes the characters seem like so cartoonishly silly. It kind of like, well, this is, you know, you're meant to be taking, you know, found footage to be kind of relatively serious, if you know what I mean, because you're going to buy into the concept. But when you have like over the top goofiness, then it doesn't really work because it kind of defeats when you're having like a spoofy schlock, but you're meant to be having this format where you are buying into the concept. Doesn't quite match to me. And let's continue on with this Naomi. Now, I'm going to say something and then I'm going to defend actually against what I've just said. I think an argument can be levelled that her acting isn't very good, right? I'm going to say that, and I think when people watch this, they might say, this character just seems like, can't like read a line. But I'm going to say I think it's intentional, because she's meant to be this host, and when she's kind of presenting, she kind of keeps like, she's not very good at it, to be quite honest. And it's not really clear, but they don't really sort of go out their way to say this, but it's like, okay, is she just there because she's an attractive woman, and have these blokes, these guys, just got this woman because she's a pretty face, but she's actually quite rubbish at her job, right? It never really goes into anything like that, but that's just me kind of putting it like together, sort of thing. So when she's presenting, she's, you know, there's long gaps, there's, you know, there's seemingly kind of mispronounces things, and it's just like, she doesn't seem particularly good. Now, I suspect that's the reason, but I don't think it's clear that that's what's going on. I think they need to have a little bit, if that is the case, which I suspect it is, it needed to be a bit more of an obvious story point, because I think as when you watch this, some people will just think she's a bad actress, because that's how it comes across. It just looks like she's a bad actress, although as I say, I think it's actually, she's just not very good at doing this presenting, and she's only there because, you know, they want to sleep there, basically. So, you know, I can imagine people saying that the acting is bad, and I think there is some credence in that, but I do think it's a choice. Okay. I think the main thing for me, though, is this movie ultimately is just not particularly interesting. You know, it has a couple of creepy moments. I would say it has when you do these scarier elements work better than they have in the previous films. But it's a lot of kind of people just shouting, overreacting to things, walking around in the woods, somewhat sort of like in a pointless fashion, and seemingly just kind of like, it just kind of goes on and on and on, and ultimately it doesn't really become that interesting, I have to say. I think there was probably a good idea for a found footage film here. I think the execution is not quite as exciting as it could have been, but I think there was the potential for it to be, you know, there you go. Overall, it has its moments, but ultimately I think it doesn't quite come together. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. If you're an ardent found footage movie fan, however, you may want to check it out. What were your thoughts if you've seen it? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.